We are very happy to welcome Neil Thompson. Welcome, Neil. Thank you very much for joining us. Adil, would you like to read Neil's bio?
Yeah, definitely. Michael, do you want me to sort of give the bio and then you'll sort of introduce the topic?
Sure.
And that works. Okay. So firstly, I want to say hello to everybody. My name is Adil Alam, and I'm going to introduce Neil. So Neil is he's an engineer. He is a children's book author and the teacher of geeks. So the last one usually gets the people's attention. What does that mean, the teacher of geeks? So he actually founded, he's the founder of Teach the Geek, which is where he works with engineers so they can communicate more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. He received a bachelor's in materials engineering and a master's in biomedical engineering, followed by working years as a product development engineer in the medical device industry. After one too many failed presentations in front of senior management, he knew that he had to get better at public speaking. And I can say we've probably been in a situation where we may have thought something similar. So he took it upon himself, and he did. He got better. He learned what he needed to learn, and he actually transitioned that into an online course, which is Teach the Geek to Speak. So now he helps engineers like himself so they don't have to be in sweaty messes in front of these senior management audiences. I just want to thank Neil firstly and the support of the CMBES Secretariat Office for coordinating the event. And Michael, why don't you give us a quick little overview of what the talk specifically is about?
Absolutely. Again, thanks very much for being with us, Neil, and sharing this great content with us. Because, I don't know about you, but with this many platinum highlights, I've certainly had a few years, and the first of those years, when you're just out of school and you're all excited and you have all this great knowledge and stuff, and yes, I'm quite a proud geek. You get excited about a topic and you have all this great knowledge and you want to share it, and you're speaking with nurses and docs, or maybe your execs or whomever, and you're giving all this great content and you hear crickets. And you need to very quickly learn how to read the blank stare and the blinking. That's like, oh, maybe I use some jargon or some, because what I've never really liked, actually, Neil and I were just talking about this before the thing started. People often use the term dumb it down for someone. And even when they say it themselves, I think that's the wrong thing. We're very smart. We're simply all educated in different fields. They're super smart, and I'm sure they could use medical jargon that would blow us away. We can also use jargon and different things. So it's really learning how to speak for your audience, because communication is about giving information and understanding of that information. That's what a healthy communication is. So we're really quite happy for Neil to help us out with that today. And with that, Neil, I would like to kick it over to you.
So maybe I can just do one quick housekeeping item. So during the webinar,
fair. Good point.
For everybody, we will accept typed questions and or comments and feedback, which are submitted online through the Zoom portal. We are not going to be doing any verbal communication. So please do ask your questions, but we'll be taking questions at the end via the chat or the questions functionality through Zoom.
Super good point. Thanks, Adil. Because we're going to do 45 minutes, I think, for Neil's talk. And then the remaining, we'll do, I think Adil's going to read the questions and Neil will answer them. And I'll throw in a couple of extra questions as well. So with that, I think we covered all of the housekeeping items. Thanks, Adil. And take it away, Neil.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me, CMBES. As has been said already, my name is Neil Thompson, and I'm going to be talking a bit about talking in front of people and the issues that some of us have. God knows I had them, and I got over them. And hopefully what I talk about today could be helpful in you getting over them as well. So a bit about me. As was mentioned, I got degrees in materials engineering and biomedical engineering, and I worked in medical devices as a product development engineer. One thing I wanted to mention, I know this is the CMBES and the C stands for Canadian. I am based in Vista, California. It's a suburb of San Diego. So I'm in Southern California where the weather is really nice. Hopefully where you are, the weather isn't so bad. But actually, I'm not from this area. I'm not from Southern California. I'm not from California. I'm not even from the US. I'm actually from Canada. So I actually am from where this is based. So I grew up in Brampton, Ontario. For those of you that don't know, it's a suburb of Toronto, west of Toronto. So that's where I'm from. I miss it sometimes, but not around this time of year, because I know around this time of year is when it starts to get cold. And I remember I remember being a kid around Halloween time. I want to go out and trick or treat because I want candy. I want the Snickers bars. But I can't go outside in just a regular costume. I still had to go outside in a coat and gloves and a hat because it's already cold October 31st in Brampton, Ontario. That's not the case here in Vista, California. But you know, I'm in my 40s now. It'd be weird going trick or treating, going up to people's doors asking for candy as a 40-something-year-old person. But I certainly do. I understand what you all are going through if you're in that environment. So yeah, I graduated from school and then I got a job as a research associate. And the job didn't require any public speaking whatsoever. I worked in a lab. I did a lot of writing of reports and also of protocols, did a lot of testing and designing in the lab. And I never talked to many people. And that's not a part of my job that I was all that unhappy about. The idea of not having to talk to people and present my research, present what I was doing in the lab. That all changed after I took a job as a product development engineer in California. So that job that I was working, that first job, that was in Boston, well, just outside of Boston. So I moved across the country into Carlsbad, California, which is a suburb of San Diego. And I took this job as a product development engineer. And I remember during the interview that they told me what the job entailed. And it was very similar to the work that I was doing as a research associate. So I thought, wait, I'm going to get more money to do the same stuff. Sign me up. And I can live in a warmer part of the country. Yeah, I'm with that. So I moved to Southern California. And a few months into the job, it was what they said it was. So I was in the lab, I was doing a lot of testing, I was doing a lot of designing, writing protocols, writing reports. And I worked in what was called the orthobiologics group. And what is orthobiologics? So I was working at a spinal device company, and spinal implants can be made out of ceramic, they can be made out of metal, but they can also be made out of human cadaver bone. And I was working in the group that was making these implants out of human cadaver bone. So if you ever donate your organs, your bones can be used to make implants for other people. So I highly recommend being an organ donor to be helpful to others. But I worked in that group. A few months of doing that, my boss called me into his office and he said that I was going to be a project lead. And I asked, what's a project lead? Turns out that the company is too cheap to hire project managers, so they pushed that responsibility on the product development engineers. And one of those responsibilities was getting up in front of senior management every month to talk about project progress. Now, when I say senior management, that's what I really mean. I mean, we're talking the CEO, the VP of marketing, VP of R&D, everybody with a corner office. They're staring at me every month to learn about project progress. And let me tell you, those first few presentations were absolutely horrendous. I didn't know it was possible to sweat that profusely from one's body, but there I was, multiple occasions. Now, we're not talking just the first presentation where I wet the bed. We're talking the first, the second, the third. And the issue that I think I had was, well, no, the issue I knew I had was I would get up there and I would slap some slides together beforehand. I didn't take all that much time putting the presentation together. I get up there, read it off, and then try to get out of there as quickly as possible. But I never got out of there as quickly as possible because oftentimes I get these questions afterwards that I thought I had answered during the presentation. So I was sweating already when I was up there. Now I'm getting these questions I thought I had answered. Now the sweat just doubled and tripled. So it was even worse. And eventually I realized that I have to get better at this and I have to be more mindful of putting these presentations together. another thing that I noticed is I was sitting on some of the other engineers' presentations because other product development engineers, they were project leads too. I noticed that their presentations weren't all that much better than mine. So I saw that there was a need in all of us, and that we have all this technical expertise, but we're not the best at putting it in such a way that non-technical people, many of whom were the senior management team, could understand. And you would see it. I mean, you'd see them staring off into space. You see them playing with their phones. You'd see, and I get these questions afterwards that I thought I had answered. So I knew that this was something that I needed to get better at. And ironically, I didn't, as I mentioned, I didn't get better after the first one. I didn't even realize I had a problem until my project got canceled. My project that I was brought to the company to do was canceled. I thought I was out of a job. So this was really the wake-up call that I needed to get better at presenting in front of people. And I did just that. And what did I do to do that? Well, I was transferred to other projects, so there was still the opportunity to present in front of management. And then I also used the opportunity of presenting in front of the team as a precursor to presenting in front of senior management. So oftentimes we'd have weekly team meetings. So this would be myself, the marketing person on the project, the operations person, manufacturing person, the quality person, regulatory affairs. So I would essentially use them as my proxy, I guess, for the senior management. And I'd go over what I was going to say to senior management and have them give me feedback on how I could get better at the presentation. That was helpful. I also joined Toastmasters. For those of you that don't know, Toastmasters is an international organization with chapters all over the world where the goal is to help people practice and just get better at public speaking. I highly recommend joining a chapter if at all possible, because wherever I was living at the time, I joined a chapter and it offered a great forum to practice giving presentations and getting feedback. So those are the things that I did. And essentially, I got a lot better at public speaking. And I used all that information that I did in getting better, and I turned it into a course, as was said earlier. And it's called Teach the Geek to Speak. It's geared towards people like me, people that work in the tech fields, engineers and scientists typically, who have to give presentations, specifically in front of non-technical audiences, because you could have all the technical expertise in the world, but if you're not able to communicate it in a way that people can understand, especially senior management, people who are decision makers, well, that may be the difference between a project getting canceled and not getting canceled, as it was the case for me. Hopefully, what I tell you all today could be helpful so that your project doesn't get canceled, and that you don't have to have that kind of wake-up call. You can have the wake-up call well before that. And then also, getting better at speaking in front of people helps in so many areas as well. I mean, working in medical devices, it helps with communicating with non-technical team members, with vendors, with customers, with surgeons. I mean, there really was no downside to getting better at it. So now I'm going to present some tips and that you can hopefully use and that are implementable, because I don't want to say anything that's too airy-fairy pie in the sky, stuff that you can actually use to get better at presenting in front of others. This first one is something that I absolutely did not take into account when I first started giving presentations. Like not even at all. I mentioned, I used to just slap some slides together and I would get up there and read the slides. Well, this is not a great way to engage an audience. You have to know what they want, know what they need to actually keep their attention. So number one tip is knowing your audience. I can remember being in an audience, and this had to do with marketing. And I was a product development engineer. I know nothing about marketing. So I'm sitting in the audience and they're using these terms that I've never heard. Inbound marketing, outbound marketing. To this day, I always get them mixed up. So am I a fool because I don't know these terms, or is it that the person giving the presentation didn't take the expertise of the audience into account, didn't take a gauge of the level of expertise of the audience? It was a mixed audience, I'll admit. There are people there, I'm sure, that knew exactly what those terms meant, but there were also novices like myself. It would have really helped keeping the attention of people like myself if the presenter weren't to have used these terms, or at least explain them, so that someone like myself, a novice, could understand and still follow the presentation. When I worked as a product development engineer in the medical device industry at one of these jobs, one tip that I can offer in helping to know the audience is to use their administrative assistants. And you might wonder, what do you mean by that? Well, it's difficult to get time with these senior management types, especially if it's a large company. They're very busy people. So one tip that I can offer is talk to their admins. They're the people that know them very well, their right-hand man or woman. Go up to them and ask them, what can I include in this presentation that I have to give that would keep your boss's attention? And they'll tell you. And then make sure that that information is in the presentation. This is a tip that I've used numerous times, especially at one of the companies where I had to give those presentations in front of management. And it was really helpful in just keeping the engagement of the senior management so they wouldn't play on their phones and stare off into space. I was actually talking about things that they actually cared about. And especially if you're talking about project progress, you definitely want to have their attention. This next one it has to do with slides. And if you're trying to read what's on the right, you're probably not listening to what I have to say, because it's very difficult to do more than one thing at once. Multitasking is for the birds. If you're reading, then you're not listening. And if you're listening, you're not reading. So I highly suggest not having a whole lot of text on a slide, because you're eliminating the option of reading the slide. People either have to listen to you or ignore you. So essentially, you've increased your odds of them listening from 1 to 3 to 1 to 2. And who doesn't like those odds? So I'm a big fan of what's on the left, having points, very few words, and having 3 points max. And I'm a big fan of that because of something called cognitive load. There's only so much information that we can take in at once. And especially if you're dealing with a non-technical audience, it's going to take them that much more time to really take in what you're saying, because they don't have the same expertise as you do. So you want to make it as easy as possible for them to take in that information. And you do that by limiting the amount of words that's going to be on a slide. I don't know if you noticed this, but up until this point, and you'll see this also in the rest of the presentation, there hasn't been a whole lot of text on these slides. It's been mostly pictures, and that's not coincidental. It's very much on purpose. It's because I want to eliminate that option of people reading the slides and have them listen to what I have to say. It also forces me to try to be as engaging as possible, as opposed to getting up there and reading, this is a densely packed grouping of words. I have no doubt that you will, and then you'll continue on with that paragraph. It's just not helpful. So I'm a big, and especially not only that, but I mean, if you wanted people to just read, you could just sent them the slides. They didn't have to sit in on the presentation. They could have read the slides at their leisure. So it's a public speaking, not public reading after all. This third tip, it's a pet peeve. And you're gonna notice I have a number of pet peeves. This is one of them, and it's people that ramble. You see what's on the right and what's on the left? What's on the left is about 50% of the words, and it conveys the same amount of information. Well, why not use less words to convey the same amount of information? There's no need to go on and on if it's not necessary. No one's ever complained about a meeting being too short. So be concise, be precise with the words that you use. This also has to do with writing. This is actually something that I learned actually not too long ago. I was listening in on a presentation, and the presenter said that shorter sentences are easier to read than longer ones. So it's always best to try to make your sentences as short as possible to increase comprehension. And that makes perfect sense, especially when you're addressing a non-technical audience. As I mentioned, they already are in the deficit when it comes to that technical expertise. So to make it as easy on them as possible, use shorter sentences because they're easier to understand. And you want their comprehension to be as high as it possibly can be. So why would you use longer sentences, which would make it more difficult for them to understand? And it made perfect sense. So when I thought about that, I mean, this person was talking about writing. And I thought when it came to speaking, that could make sense too. So I always try to make my sentences as short as possible to increase the level of comprehension of the people in the audience. This one, when I first started giving presentations, is again something that I didn't take into account. As I said, I slapped stuff onto slides and got up there and read. And I read a lot of technical jargon. Well, what are the odds that people that are outside of your field of expertise are going to understand the technical jargon? It's pretty minimal. And if they don't understand, it's likely that they don't listen. And if they do listen, then you're going to get questions afterwards asking what all these words meant. And you could have explained that from the beginning, or you could have used more analogous words, more commonly used words. I mentioned I worked in orthobiologics, which was using human cadaver bone to make spinal implants. Well, I'm sure many of you here know, but bone is made out of a number of cells, 2 of which are osteoblasts and osteoclasts. If I go on and on about osteoblasts and osteoclasts to a bunch of people who don't understand what osteoblasts and osteoclasts are, you're going to get a lot of blank stares, or just a lot of people just not listening to what you're saying. So why not use more commonly used words? An osteoblast essentially is a bone-forming cell, and an osteoclast is a bone-eating cell. If you use those words, especially bone-eating and bone-forming, like you can actually see it. It's easier to understand things when you can actually visualize them. Why not use those words instead, or at least explain what an osteoblast and an osteoclast is using those words initially at the beginning of a presentation, and then perhaps using osteoblast and osteoclast throughout the rest of the presentation. But at least you explained it early on in the presentation. Bone forming, bone eating, that's easily understandable, much more so than osteoblast and osteoclast. Another thing I think a lot of us engineers really need to take into account is that we weren't always experts in what we're experts at now. So we really need to have a lot more empathy for the people that we're talking to. And it's so weird that you don't think about that. At least I didn't think about that when I was giving presentations. I mentioned I was in a presentation for marketing. I know nothing about marketing. The presenter obviously knows a whole lot about marketing. Well, couldn't he have some empathy towards someone like myself who may not know what inbound marketing means or what outbound marketing means? Obviously he's known what those words have meant for years, I'm sure, but not everyone in the audience does. So take that into account when putting your presentations together. Use more commonly used words to increase the number of people that'll actually listen. Obviously, the people who are experts know what an osteoblast and an osteoclast are, but for those who don't, you're able to maintain their attention too. And that just increases the number of people who are paying attention. And why wouldn't you want that? Having a call to action in your presentations. This is important. You need the people to know, the people in the audience, especially if they're decision makers, they need to know what you need them to do after. So this question, what do I do, is the question you want them asking themselves at the end of the presentation. And they shouldn't be confused as to what that answer is. When I gave presentations on project progress, oftentimes what I needed them to do is provide more resources, maybe provide more time, maybe provide more money. I need more people to work on this to make sure that we hit the goal of releasing the product on time. That needs to be communicated, especially near the end of the presentation. So that's the last thing that they remember, is these decision makers. You don't want there to be any kind of ambiguity as to what they're supposed to do after the presentation. And when it comes to a call to action, even when it comes to putting a presentation together, I suggest starting with that call to action and then working backwards. What information do I need to include in the presentation that will eventually lead to that call to action? So it might sound a bit counterintuitive starting from the end and working backwards, but it really is helpful in putting a presentation together. And you make sure that what you need to have done will get done because the words or the information that you have in the presentation leads to that thing that needs to be done. This next tip, this is another one of those pet peeves of mine. Timing presentations. Time your presentations. Time them when you're practicing them. And you want to do that because when you go over time, it's disrespectful to your audience. I firmly believe this. I'm somebody who is giving a presentation on project progress in front of senior management. These people are busy. And let me just tell you something about that project progress presentation that I had to give in front of senior management at this company. This was an all-day affair. They weren't just listening to my project. They were listening to all the projects in the company all in one day. So just back to back to back of engineers getting up in front of them and presenting project progress on whatever project they were working on. So it would be in our best interest to stay within time, especially if we want them to maintain their attention. They're already going to be there all day. They're probably not that happy about that. they're going to be even more unhappy if they know people are going over time, making it longer than it needs to be. So I'm a big fan of timing your presentation when you're practicing them. And God knows I've been in a number of presentations, especially going to conferences, where you think that the presentation is going to be 15 minutes and then it goes 20. And then that just throws the whole agenda of the conference off kilter. And now I'm going to be late for lunch because I stayed to the end of that 20-minute presentation. And now I'm mad because I'm hungry. You don't want to be that person that throws off the agenda because you didn't practice beforehand. I mentioned a 15-minute presentation. This is just an example. If you're given 15 minutes to present, don't practice to 15 minutes because undoubtedly you'll likely go over. I say practice to 14. So you give yourself that 1 minute buffer in the event that during the presentation when you're talking, you give yourself that 1 minute buffer so that even if you ad-lib something, you still will likely finish within that 15-minute allotment. I'm a big fan of this. Please, I have a friend who is he makes fun of me for the fact that I practice my presentations because he often just gets up and wings it. He's not an engineer, so maybe that's the reason. I don't know. But with his presentations, I can tell that they weren't practiced. I could tell that he winged it. I mean, there's a lot of ums in there, a lot of filler words, there's a lot of thoughts going together that possibly could have been better, what's the word I'm looking for, put together in a more logical flow. If you practice your presentation before that, you can work on all of that. What makes sense to say first, second, and third? What can I cut out? Because sometimes you might get up there and wing it, and then that 15 minutes turns into 20 real easy. And then now you're mad. Now people are mad because you went over time. At least I'm mad if I'm in the audience. So I suspect others might not be all that happy about it either. So please time your presentations. And if you're given a certain allotment, give yourself a minute buffer at least to make sure that you are within time. So I mentioned this earlier about my friend who winged his presentations. These filler words. This same friend, oh, luckily he's not on this call, so he won't hear this. He was a guest on my podcast. And my mother gave me a call after the podcast. She said that I did a good job. I'm not surprised she said that. She always says I do a good job. She said that she couldn't listen to the rest of the presentation or the rest of the interview because my friend, my guest, used a whole lot of filler words. And it was very distracting for her. She said after 5 minutes, she had to stop listening. See, I'm a type of person that's not all that distracted by filler words like so, like those type of words that we often use in just regular speaking. But obviously there are people like my mother, maybe more than we care to admit, who are distracted by those type of words. So I'm a big fan of telling others to try to minimize them so you're at least able to keep those type of people's attention. And it also helps in just in the presentation actually flowing a little better. You're not hung up with a bunch of ums and so's, And oftentimes what people might even think is, does this person even know what they're talking about? Did this person even practice this presentation beforehand? Why is there a whole bunch of ums? What do you mean? What's the next point, man? Get to it. So I'm a big fan of trying to minimize them. I have a coaching client, and he sent me a video of himself doing a presentation, just a Zoom presentation, and I watched it. It was about 45 minutes, and within that 45 minutes, he said about 100 times. That's a lot of ums. And I'm almost certain he didn't realize that he used as many filler words as he did, because oftentimes when you're in the moment, you're not really trying to keep track of that kind of thing. It's only when you look at the tape afterwards do you realize, wow, that was a lot of ums. And if he was trying to keep the attention of someone like my mother, he would have failed 5 minutes in. So you don't want to be that person if at all possible. Try to minimize those filler words. Feedback is something that I am a big fan of getting. It's really helpful, just not even just when it comes to speaking in front of others, just in life. You get better at when you get feedback from others. But one thing that I want to say about feedback is you shouldn't feel compelled to take in all feedback that you get. And this actually stems, and I learned this lesson from being a member of Toastmasters. for those of you that don't know how a Toastmasters meeting goes, there are 3 sections to it. There's table topics, which is impromptu speaking, there's prepared speeches, and then there's evaluations. So with those last 2, someone would give a presentation, and then there would be someone to evaluate that person's presentation. So there'd be often times where someone might get up and give their presentation and then get contradictory feedback. This happened to me at least once that I can remember. I was told after my presentation that I need to improve my eye contact. But then another evaluator said, I really liked your eye contact. Well, who are you listening to? Well, you have to figure that out, because obviously you can't listen to both of them. They contradict each other. You have to run it through your filter. Which one do I agree with? Which is eye contact even something that I'm really interested in improving, even if it's something that someone says I need to improve? Just because someone says you need to do something doesn't mean you need to do it. It turns out that eye contact is something that I was working on. And actually, I'll talk a bit about that, I think, in the next slide about what I did to help me with my eye contact. So if you don't take anything else away from this tip, it's listen to all feedback. I'm a big fan of listening, but don't feel compelled to implement all the feedback that you get. Run it through your own filter and see if it makes sense for you, or if it's even something that you care to work on. Because just because someone says you should, that doesn't mean that you have to. Voice speed. Voice speed is not something that I ever really thought about when it came to giving presentations. But from a bit of research, I saw that perhaps it could be helpful, and especially if you're talking to a non-technical audience, with helping them with their retention of what you're saying. You see the blue box on the right, the words in white, if you were to read them, that's 100 words. You then divide 100 by the amount of time it took you to read those words in minutes, you'll have your words per minute. I suggest you actually take a screenshot of this so that you can have this to practice, because I found it really helpful. Oftentimes we don't talk as quickly or as slowly as perhaps we think we do. It's 140 words per minute typically is what most people speak at. And from the research I did, I saw that when delivering bad news, they actually say speak a little faster. And you might be wondering why. It's so that the people in the audience don't have enough time to come up with arguments against what you're saying, which kind of makes sense. So if you have some bad news to give, for instance, there's a restructuring happening at the company, you want to speed through that as quickly as possible. You don't want to slow it down for people to reach it. What do you mean I lost my job? What are you talking about? You don't want to be, the company's going through a restructuring, you are going to be losing your job, please pack up your things. You want to speed through that, just get through it. HR will be contacting you. When it comes to more technical kind of presentations, especially in front of a non-technical audience who's going to take a bit more time in really taking in your messaging, I highly suggest speaking a bit slower. So 110 to 140 words per minute, unless you're delivering bad news in a technical presentation, then maybe you speed it up. But yeah, what you see on the right has been really helpful to me in just modulating how fast I speak when giving presentations. As I said, there's 100 words there, 100 divided by the amount of time it took you to read that in minutes, and there's your words per minute. Now, this is something I mentioned earlier. I was told that I needed to improve my eye contact. Another person said they like my eye contact. Well, I agreed with the former. I need to improve my eye contact. But how was I going to do it? The issue that I had with eye contact is that when I looked in people's eyes when giving presentations, I would often forget what I was going to say next. And obviously that's a problem. If you're giving a presentation, you want to make sure that you remember what you're going to say. People are there for that. So what did I do to maintain eye contact while still remembering what I had to say in the presentation? Well, I wouldn't look in people's eyes. I looked at their eyebrows. They can't tell the difference. It looks all the same. And it really helped me because I wouldn't forget what I was saying if I looked at their eyebrows as opposed to their eyeballs. And especially if they're far away, they really can't tell if you're looking at their eyeballs or their eyebrows. Not eyelids, eyebrows. Eyelids are too close to the eyeballs. So I'm always a fan of looking at those eyebrows to really it certainly helped me. It's a hack that I've used to be able to have the semblance of eye contact without forgetting what I was going to say next. So try it out. Let me know how it works out for you. Worked out well for me. This next one might sound a little woo-woo, and maybe that's not the best for engineers, but let me tell you, this has been a game changer for me when it comes to giving presentations. And it's visualizing how you want things to go. If you tell yourself that you're a poor public speaker, you will be. If you tell yourself you suck, you will, most likely. But if you tell yourself that you're improving, this is something that you're going to get better at, then you're more likely, that's more likely to happen. So typically before I give a presentation, and I did this before this presentation, I'd close my eyes, I take a deep breath, and then I'd picture how I'd want things to go. All the tech worked as it was supposed to. My camera worked, my mic worked. I was able to log into Zoom. I was able to load up my presentation. People can see me on the video. They can see my presentation. I'm able to go through my slides. I remembered everything that I wanted to say in my slides. And even if I didn't, no one would notice anyway, because they know what I was going to say in the first place. So I don't make it that big of a deal. I get through my presentation. People ask me questions. I have the answers for those questions. And for the ones that I don't have the answers for, I'm not afraid to say that I don't have that answer. It only helps me in improving presentations for next time, because it gives me questions to get answers to for those future presentations. I finish the presentation. They say thank you. I log off of Zoom, and that's it. I then open my eyes, and then I feel a lot more confident, a lot more poised going into that presentation, thinking it's going to go well. And it's been so helpful to me and to others that I've told that I've suggested do this. It's just see yourself doing well in what you want to do well at, and it's more likely that is what's going to happen. I'm a big fan of this visualization. It works. So this last tip, this is a tip that a lot of people are hesitant to do. God knows I was. It wasn't something that I was real happy about doing, but I saw this as being the difference between getting better at public speaking and not. And this probably has to do with the fact that I have a poor memory. But it's videoing yourself. You really want to get better at this? Video yourself doing it. This applies both to on-site presentations and for these virtual ones. I mean, it's really helpful to be able to look back at the tape to see what you could improve on, but also what you liked about your presentation. I'm not a big fan of just dwelling on the things that you need to improve on. And another thing I want to say about videoing yourself, you'll often notice things in the presentation that you didn't even know you were doing during the presentation. I mentioned I have a coaching client. He said 100 times in 45 minutes. I mean, there has to be a record. I mean, he has to be close. You think he thought he said that many times? I highly doubt it. But when you look at the tape, it's right there. I mean, I could have told him, you said 100 times. And if he didn't see the tape, he might not believe me. Like, there's no way. But once you see the tape, you know what it is. The tape doesn't lie. It shows you. Yeah, 100 times. 20 minutes, 47 seconds. You said and then 5 seconds later, you said it again. You're on a roll for a minute or so. So it's really helpful just being able to look back at the thing that you can improve on, because you might not even have known that these were things that you were doing. But then at the same token, I'm a big fan of looking at these videos or at the tape to make sure that you see the things that you actually liked about your presentation. You don't want to get too down on yourself, because practice makes progress. There's going to be an opportunity to practice or to give another presentation, and you're going to take obviously you're going to take advantage of that opportunity when it comes. So I'm a big fan of videoing yourself. You know, almost everything is through Zoom these days. It's very easy to do. You have a camera and a stand for a camera in your phone, and you have a stand. You can easily take a picture or a video of yourself. I'm doing so right now with my camera, my video camera, or my phone camera and my stand, to make sure I can look at this afterwards and see what I liked about it and what I could improve on. Absolute game changer. So I mentioned in the beginning that I had a course called Teach the Geek to Speak. And when I first put that course together, it was me sitting at my kitchen table, just talking about the things that I thought were interesting or important when it comes to public speaking, things that I learned while giving presentations in front of management, or I learned giving presentations in front of the team, or I learned from Toastmasters. And I kind of put it all together and I called it a course. Well, I sent this course to one of my friends and she said, this is absolutely horrendous. You cannot put this out here. And the reason she said it was so bad is because there was no flow to it. There was no process to it. And the more I thought about it, the more embarrassed I became. I worked in medical devices. It's in the US. That's FDA regulated stuff we're talking about. You have to follow a process to develop medical devices in this country. So why wouldn't I put a process to my own course? I still don't know the answer, but it was a great suggestion from my friend, and it's something that I took to heart, and then I did. Essentially, I developed a 6-step process that you can use again and again, so it's repeatable to practice and deliver any presentation that you have to give. And here's the process here. I highly suggest taking a screenshot of this slide as well. First thing, you gotta know your audience. I mean, you could slap some slides together like I did and then go up there and read them. You're likely not gonna be that adept at keeping the attention of the audience because you didn't take their wants and needs into account when you put the presentation together in the first place. You got to know what their expertise level is, what they want out of the presentation to make it so that the presentation is of use to them. So that's the first thing. And then developing a speech structure. I mean, I said earlier, call to action, work backwards. What do I need to say in the presentation, the body of the presentation that leads to that call to action, and figuring that out, and then developing your speech from there. Timing. Timing. You got to practice your presentations to make sure that you don't go over time. It's disrespectful, as I mentioned, to the audience to go over time, especially if you're in a situation that I spoke about, the scenario I did with those presentations in front of management. These are back-to-back presentations. You don't want to be that person that throws the whole agenda off whack because you went over time. You don't want to be that guy. That guy's never looked at in a positive light. Track those filler words, and that helps by looking at the video. I mean, when I sent that back to my coaching client, 100 ums in 45 minutes, it's really helpful for him to know, okay, this is perhaps something that I need to get better at. And it also helps with keeping the attention of people like my mom. Funny thing about that, I actually read an article not too long ago, actually, and it said that people who use a lot of filler words are actually seen as conscientious. Well, I highly doubt my mother would agree with that article. Because she ain't listening. She won't even get to the conscientious part because she stopped listening a minute or two into the presentation. So I'm a big fan of minimizing those words to up the likelihood that as many people as possible will actually pay attention to your presentation. And then these next 2 points, they actually have to do with vantage points. So it's get feedback and then develop a personal inventory. When I say get feedback, I'm talking about the feedback or the opinions of others. When I say develop a personal inventory, that has to do with what you believe you need to get better at. So one is looking outward and one's looking inward. It's very important. Obviously, it's important to get that feedback, as I mentioned, from other people, but don't feel the need to implement it just because they said so. But then you have to look within yourself and determine what do I think I need to get better at. I mean, I mentioned eye contact, but that was my big thing. I need to get better at this eye contact. That's how I developed that hack of looking at people's eyebrows as opposed to their eyeballs. That was from me doing a personal inventory and figuring that out. So this is my 6-step process. You do this for every presentation that you have to give, and I think you'll be in great shape. So now I'd like to talk a bit about the ways that we can potentially keep in touch. So I mentioned that I had a friend who was on my podcast. I should have mentioned that I also have a YouTube channel. Essentially, the podcast is an audio version of the YouTube channel. I interview engineers mostly, and it's really interesting to learn about their journey. So I interview them specifically about public speaking. As I'm sure some of you can appreciate, we're not known, us engineers are not known as being the best public speakers. And I don't think that has to be that way. We have a lot of technical expertise, that's for sure. and every one of us, I'm sure, based on our field of expertise, our domain, there's a lot of technical jargon there. But that doesn't mean that we're not able to present in front of these non-technical audiences to great effect. We just have to take a lot of the tips that I mentioned into account to make it that so that they're more likely to pay attention. So it's really interesting to talk to these engineers who also came to the same idea that I did, that getting better at public speaking would only be better for us engineers. And the ways in which they did it and finding that out has been really interesting too. So I'll ask them questions like, do you have a process for putting your presentations together? And if so, what is it? Do you ever get nervous? And if so, how do you deal with your nerves? Even, have you always been good at public speaking? And if not, what did you do to get better at it? And just finding out this information has been really helpful. Well, it's been helpful to myself. Oftentimes I'll ask questions that are helpful to me because I'm really interested to learn from these people that I'm interviewing. But I'm sure it's helpful to the people who listen into the interviews as well. So if you like looking at videos, you can go to the YouTube channel. If you like looking at or you like listening instead, then you can go to the podcast. But you can find the podcast by going to the YouTube channel because there's a link to the podcast there too. And then one other thing I want to mention. Oh, another thing I just wanted to mention. I just thought of it just now. When it comes to the engineers that I talk to on my YouTube channel and podcast, learning their career journeys has been so interesting too. I mentioned that. I mean, you mentioned even in my bio, I wrote a children's book. I mean, how many engineers do you know out here writing children's books? And I worked in medical devices for a number of years. But it's always interesting to learn the other things that us engineers can do and that we do. You don't have to just stick in this one spot of being, okay, I'm a biomedical engineer, I'm a clinical engineer, and that's it. You can have other interests, and you can let those other interests dictate what you do, and just let those interests lead you and then see where they take you. I'm a big fan of that. I mean, one of the people I recently interviewed, she got a degree in civil engineering, then she worked as a lawyer, then she was a stay-at-home mom for a decade, and now she's a personal stylist. That's a pretty linear line, wouldn't you think? It's always interesting to hear from these type of people. And then I have some tips in addition to the ones that I shared today that you can get access to. 5 easy public speaking tips for us engineers, STEM professionals. And you can get access to that at teachthegeek.com/tips. So there's the tips, there's the YouTube channel. Hopefully we can stay in touch. And that is what I have to present. Thank you all so much for being here, and I can take questions. 42 minutes and 46 seconds. I'm on time. I follow my own advice.
That's awesome, Neil. Thank you very much. That was fantastic content. Thank you very much. I was taking notes madly all the way through it, of course, and it's neat. What I really liked your look at their eyebrows rather than their eyes to make contact. And one thing that has always bugged me, and I thought about this, and I tried to make a little adjustment partway through the talk. I don't know if anyone else did, but has anyone else noticed over this last year and a half of lovely COVID and Zoom, Teams, Skype, etc. meetings, which is just tiresome, but your camera is up here. All the pictures are way over here. So you see everyone's face looking this way, but their eyes are looking that way. And that always drives me nuts. So what I did actually is I minimized and I have only your picture and I put it right underneath the camera. So that I'm looking at you, but I'm also looking at the camera. Do you have, but what if I want to see everyone? Have you thought about that? Do you have any tips that maybe folks can use for, say, a Zoom or a Teams type meeting?
Yeah, that's a great point, Michael, and you're absolutely right. That's actually something that I've struggled with myself, is just being able to look at various things, simultaneously. It's kind of difficult to do. Yeah, especially when you're the one giving the presentation. It's hard to focus on the camera when you want to see the reactions of the people also that are looking at the presentation, if at all possible. So it's kind of you're going back and forth. I mean, is there a hack that I've developed for that? I can't say that there has been. It's definitely a work in progress for myself as well.
That's awesome. I have some other points, but Adil, I think we have at least one question.
Yeah.
Do we want to go to the Q&A?
Yeah, let's do that. We have about 8 minutes left. So Paul asks Neil that video conferencing, so very apt sort of segue. So Zoom presentations are like talking to a void. Any suggestions on how to improve the situations and what to do differently?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. At least when you're on site, and you're talking in front of people, you can see their reactions. You can see that they're staring off into space and looking at their phones. But when it comes to Zoom, that's kind of difficult to do. I mean, having the chat being open is helpful, and encouraging people to put, to write in the chat, that can help in keeping engagement. Doing polls can be helpful too in helping keep engagement. Obviously, I'm giving advice that I didn't do myself, but I'm a big fan of these things as well. Just obviously there's other aspects that you have to, and exercises also in presentations could be helpful. Asking people, obviously, if you have more time, you can ask people to participate in an exercise, which can help them in maintaining the engagement of people as well. So yeah, I mean, obviously the less time you have, the more difficult that is to do. But certainly if you have the time, there are these other tips that you can implement to make these presentations a bit more engaging. And that's really important to do, especially since Zoom is likely going to be our future for the foreseeable future.
That's depressing, but true. I want to mention, and there's one more question, or there's another question that Adil's going to read just a second. I wanted to highlight the filler words, because we always hear that, but it's like we don't really listen. And I noticed, and I said there on purpose, but do you notice when you're listening to someone who really, really knows their topic, and they never, ever say or like or such like that, and you just get the sense that, wow, they really know their stuff. And even when they do have to take a pause, instead of using a filler word, they consider and then they speak. So you in your talk actually had a little pause, and I found I did this myself. When you paused, I was writing, I looked up and I looked at you, and I don't know if it's kind of like, uh-oh, mom's quiet, she's looking at me, am I about to get in trouble, or are they looking at me and I'm about to get in trouble? But a little pause is one of those things that it sucks in your audience. Do you find little things like, because clearly you give a lot of talks and you're watching your audience as you do that, do you find that, and are there other little things that you've noticed that really gets and keeps an audience's attention?
What you're saying right now, Michael, is something that I have never considered. But you know why I pause? It's because I was a member of Toastmasters and I got tired of them taking my money. So depending on the Toastmasters group that you're a part of, you actually have to give them money every time you use a filler word, up until a minimum or a maximum. So I don't want to give them money anymore. So I really worked hard on getting rid of these filler words, and pauses didn't count as filler words. So I started using pauses instead. But I like your explanation better. Sounds more profound.
That's fantastic. Sorry, I'll be quiet now, Adil. I think you have a question.
The next question from Sarah. It's more of a comment rather, but it is. She mentioned that it's an excellent presentation. Thank you. She said she was also going to ask about the engaging through eye contact in virtual meetings, but clearly we've already sort of spoken about that as well. The next question is asking, how is it best to incorporate a hands-on demonstration during a presentation? Just because much of our job is hands-on.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Hands-on demonstration during a presentation. Well, you have to explain it well enough beforehand. Actually, you know what? This actually reminds me of that same presentation that my coaching client had me review or look at. He had a part in it where there was an exercise to do, and this may not be analogous to hands-on, but I think it could be applicable. He asked them to do this exercise, but he didn't present them with any examples of how they can do the exercise. So that was actually one of the I wouldn't say criticisms, but one of the pieces of feedback that I had for him on his presentation is that you need to provide people, if you're going to ask them to do something, provide them with an example of it before, so that they can get in their mind what this exercise is supposed to be. So in this instance, the exercise was him asking them a question, and they're supposed to provide answers. So just providing a couple of examples of what answers could be, and then kind of get their mind jogging, and hopefully not get them in such a way that they go down a certain path based on the answers that he provided, but just get them in the mind frame of actually providing answers to this particular question in the exercise. So just pre-framing things beforehand, I think, is helpful when it comes to these, I guess, a hands-on type of demonstration, so that the people are in the mind frame to really receive the information that comes from the hands-on presentation or the hands-on demonstration.
Great, thank you. One question I actually had was related more towards, I remember you talked about slides, and obviously a lot of text. What about in terms of visuals and pictures? So at times, sometimes you see sort of white space, and just the first thought is, let's just fill that up with a big size picture, and maybe the picture doesn't necessarily add value to the slide, but it lessens the white space. So it just subconsciously you think that's better. Well, what is it though? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I don't think it's better at all if you're putting something on the slide that doesn't have anything to do with the slide just because you're scared of white space. I mean, when it comes to presenting, I mean, you're really keen on the people listening to what you have to say, not necessarily looking at your screen or looking at their slides and noticing white space. If you're engaging in what you're talking about and they're really interested to hear what you have to say, they're likely not even going to notice the white space anyway. And why then take the effort of filling it with something that didn't add to the slide in the first place?
Yeah, that's fair. Short and simple.
Cool, good point.
Yeah.
I had a quick question. Because I mean, we're in a bilingual country, French, English. You're living in a really kind of a bilingual country, English with a fair bit of Spanish. Can you find Toastmaster chapters where you can practice in another language? Because I mean, I used to be totally bilingual, but I'm not anymore on a technical realm. I have a conversation in French, no problem. But would I want to speak technically in the hospital? No. So is there a version or a chapter of Toastmasters where you can practice in another language?
That's something I don't actually know. I mean, all the Toastmasters groups that I've been a part of have been in English only. But I'm certain that there are some. If you do any kind of research on the website, toastmasters.org, you could find some bilingual clubs. They got all types of different clubs. They got clubs within companies. They may very well have bilingual clubs. Do they have one in your area? Although I suppose now that doesn't even really matter, since most are meeting virtually anyway. So you could probably join a club outside of wherever you're from, and they could be speaking that language that you want to practice in.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll have to look that up. I think in Canada it's usually called like Club Jazette or something like that. So I'll have to look for something like that. I think, one before we wrap up, because we do want to be respectful of people's times per your very good comment. I see the teachthegeek.com and the youtube.teachthegeek.com. Would it be appropriate for us to share your email address if folks wanted to send you a question, or can they find that, for instance, if they go to your website?
Oh yeah, I mean, they could find that they go to either of those places, but you could absolutely share the email. It's hello@teachthegeek.com.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, with that, Adil, unless you have a follow-up point?
No, I think, again, it's went past the hour. We'll be respectful of everyone's time. I know that we're going to be hopefully doing a lot more of the webinars as part of a new strategy that we're implementing with respect to the fact we're not going to be having a conference in 2022. So stay tuned for that, everybody, for a lot more engaging talks coming our way. Michael?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. That's a perfect segue, and that's actually what I was going to end on. So, for instance, our next presentation is going to be in early December, where we're going to have actually he's an old undergrad student of mine. He's gone on to take his PhD now, and he's worked on wearable devices, and so he's going to be talking about brain device interface and wearables and lots of neat high tech things. So we're about to launch a really good working group to kickstart and greatly increase the number of webinars that we'll be presenting. We're going to be doing our best to pay attention both to the hospital public side as well as the academic higher tech, new tech kind of side to try and really have at least one webinar per month, if not more, catering to a broad range of interests and topics. So stay tuned for that. We are really excited actually to kickstart that and really invigorate it. And with that, Neil, I would like to thank you very much once again for your excellent and engaging talk. And for those who are online, thank you very much for attending. From myself and Adil, the dynamic duo, we're very happy to bring this this content to you, and we look forward to seeing you again. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.